Hello again, this is Grant Swartzwelder, and welcome to another episode of Oilfield Strong. First thing I want to do today is to really show appreciation for PBOG, Permian Basin Oil and Gas. They offer a magazine, website, a variety of things, and I kind of call them the 60 Minutes of the energy industry, where they go really in depth on various issues. I urge you to go to pbog.com, see how you can subscribe and really see a lot of great information that they provide about the industry. One of those things that we're going to be talking about today is really valuable, and it has really become a hot area. It's offering power out in the oil field, but also data centers and a variety of other areas. We'll find out more about that. But we're very fortunate to have probably one of the leaders, the originators of this industry segment today. His name is Josh Evans. He is a good Aggie, so as y'all know, that makes my heart really happy. But he is probably more important is CEO and chair of High Volt Energy, who has, as I mentioned, was one of the first. I guess I saw the phrase, and it was an interesting phrase: first electric midstream company. And so that's fascinating how that is thought through, and we'll find out about that. So, Josh, thank you very much for coming on today. I know we've been trying to do this, and because you've been so busy with this industry segment, it's been a challenge, but thank you for making the time. So,
Yeah,
let's
Grant, I appreciate you having me today.
great. So, Josh, start off with just give our audience kind of an idea of what high volt is, what its market is, and what you're trying to achieve, and then we'll kind of go into the details from there.
Yeah, High Volt, as you mentioned, is a midstream power provider. And so, what we try to do is work with customers who are in areas that can't be supported by the grid or don't have access to clean, reliable electricity. And we come in and build solutions which generally comprise of some level of power infrastructure connected to generation facilities.
And it started off being more in the oil field related and has really grown into other areas. Explain kind of how what the initial market was and how that's evolved.
Yeah, so I come from a EPC consulting background, worked for a large company called Burns and McDonnell. And at the tail end of my career at Burns and McDonnell, I was seeing an opportunity where we were working with a lot of customers in the oil field that had tremendous amounts of electrical infrastructure that they were owning and operating out of necessity, not necessarily because it was part of their core business. And so we were seeing increased, you think about, and 2019 is when I started the company officially, but you think about that timeline, there was a big press for environmental safety and health. There was a big press to electrify everything, reduce emissions. And so you started seeing it specifically in the oil field, a lot of electrification. And what that really comprised of is companies going out to the utilities, trying to build their own substations in some instances. They were building distribution wire, trying to connect into the utilities because some of the wait times were so long. And it just seemed like there was an opportunity. So as I started looking into the industry, I think there's long been opportunities of how these companies would go about it. Primarily, you would have some service companies that would go out and provide power as a service. You would also have rental companies that would drag out equipment. And even if it was on a 1 year or 2 year type contract, it was really intended to be on the customer site to where the customer had a lot of responsibilities in connecting and operating that infrastructure until the utility was able to arrive. And so when we talk, and you mentioned early that we are more of a midstream model, what we've tried to do, and since inception, we looked at past history of different evolutions of the oil and gas industry. You know, back in the 80s, a lot of the oil and gas companies were vertically integrated. They owned their own gathering lines and gas processing facilities. That industry transformed to where now we have midstream companies that not only handle the logistics of last mile pipe and gas processing, but they also bring the capital market to own and operate that infrastructure. And so Hyvel really took a sheet out of their playbook, and what we have offered is a one-stop location. Whenever we get hired, we handle everything from fuel logistics. We own equipment and we own all the infrastructure, own high volt locations. It's not on our customer facility. We aggregate the load to make it to where we can use larger equipment that's more efficient, and then put emissions control on that equipment to where we are burning natural gas in a clean and environmentally conscious way. And then we deliver that power to our customers to where they don't have to worry about when things go bump in the night. They don't have to worry about reliability of those systems. And so by centralizing that generation, we're able to do things like add batteries and add equipment to make sure that we can ride through any interruptions in service and provide very highly reliable power to our customers.
And that seems to be a big differentiating factor between what High Volt does and what a rental company does. It seems like that need for continuous, uh, certain power is really the big driver for y'all's market.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, when you're trying to provide power 24/7, 365 at 99 plus percent availability, especially when we start getting into data center markets and talking about some of the industries that are moving in today's world, where you're out two, three, four, five nines reliability, that gets into the minutes per year that you can be interrupted. And really the desire is never to have an interruption. And so high volt, a major differentiator in us is we're a group of largely engineers that have focused on how to design a system, make it very scalable, and make it very reliable. And so we've worked with some of the best names in the industry, like Caterpillar. We've worked with battery manufacturers, and we've taken this technology that was already a very proven technology, but we've applied it in a different way that's intended not only to be grid supporting or not only to be an on-site solution, but it's a consolidated power plant that's operating again with very high reliability.
Let's merge a couple of those points about market and reliability because oil field, you want it reliable, but if it goes down, they're used to that. But as you move into data centers and some of these other applications, I would think that that reliability increases. Talk about how that market has changed from, I'll throw this and then you can correct me, kind of from the oil field, and I'm sure you're still doing a lot on the oil field side, but I gotta believe that data centers and AI and all that stuff is really becoming a huge dominant uh, uh, client area of y'all's. But how is that? How's the market changed? But then also, how have you had to respond differently?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In the oil field, what I always point people to is what does it cost when you go down? So a lot of our facilities are servicing oil companies that have ESPs, downhole pumps, and have sensitive equipment to where they get pretty upset if the power blips as well. And one little flash in power that is pretty common even on a utility system, it may require them several hours of downtime so they can take all the head pressure out and restart their ESPs. We also do a lot of electric compression. We see a lot of that load on our systems. And some of our customers are even using e-drilling rigs, which have very large transient loads. And a transient load is basically a large swing in power demand. And so I'd say the oil field is more conducive to even the AI loads, to where now data centers, one of the things they're known for, and it depends on the application of the data centers. But when you start talking about how data centers and these hyperscalers train models, you may go from zero power to a gigawatt to 500 megawatts to a gigawatt back to zero. And all of these changes are happening so fast. We measure really power reactivity and transients in milliseconds. And so 2 or 3 milliseconds in power is a lifetime. And so when you see things changing so quickly, you've got to implement batteries, you've got to implement other technologies. to even protect the generation equipment, but also make sure that you're able to deliver highly reliable power without customers going down. So, in training models for AI and what we see in these data centers is they can't afford to ever go down. They have to stay up, and the cost of going down on power could be millions of dollars on the backside for the AI data centers. So it's really driven us into a mindset of how do we design and operate a highly reliable system. And thankfully, what High Volt's been doing in the oil and gas build has already really defined our blueprint of how to make that happen. Because if you look at our data center designs versus our oil and gas facilities, they want to be lean. They want to get the most effective, efficient cost of power, and so we may have less redundancy in those systems, but they're operating again at 99+% availability. You go to data centers, and how do you get those extra nines? Is by adding equipment, adding redundancy in your pipeline, your fuel gas pipeline, adding redundancy in how we deliver that power to the data center. And so you can imagine that redundancy equals cost. So when you have a more expensive facility, the power costs a little bit more. But whether they get that through the grid or whether they get that from behind the meter solutions, there's great opportunity in those spaces, and they're consuming such a large amount of power. Uh, the investment starts to make sense.
As you mentioned, this has become a much more visible market segment. With that comes competition. Being in the oil field service sector also, it's amazing how everyone thinks they can go immediately into something like this. So I'd love to talk to you about what you're seeing from a competition standpoint. And I think that could be a frac company coming into it, but also it seems like there's a lot of oil and gas companies and others that are trying to create their own electric generation capabilities. So there's kind of two different aspects of that competition.
Yeah, I think that's right. And any market in the free world that shows a lot of potential, you're going to have a lot of entrants into that market.
Sure.
Right now, I think if I spend too much time scrolling through LinkedIn, it feels like a new opportunity pops up every day. But I like to say in an industry crowded with concepts and headlines, High Volt offers the rare occurrence of having proven solutions backed by operating facilities. And so it feels like a lot of people think that power is easy. They think that, hey, we're just going to go buy equipment, we're going to drag it out, and it's all going to work great. There are far fewer people that have actually proven out how to achieve the reliability that people expect. We had a really fun story. I don't know if it's fun, but I'm going to share it anyway.
Okay.
Uh, we had a customer that it was an oil field customer that said, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna be a self performing company. We're gonna go out and do our own generation." And back when Winter Storm Fern came through this year, we met them at a conference. And walking into the conference, they asked, they said, "Hey, how did High Volt fare during Winter Storm Fern?" And our chief commercial officer answered and said, "Well, we didn't really have any issues. We kept up and running." And he said, "Man, we've got our turbines and everything went down for a week and a half. We couldn't get anything started back up." And about that time, one of our other customers heard, and it was the CEO of one of the largest companies there in Midland. He whipped around and he was like, "Oh man, you guys messed up. You really need High Volt on this because they never went down. We were still drilling and fracking while a lot of the areas were out of power and out of commission." So I think experience matters, and this is really, I mean, that isn't to say that people can't go figure this out, but it does take expertise. It does take investment in R&D. It takes an understanding of how to control these systems together. And so, what I fear for the industry is sometimes when everybody moves so fast, there are opportunities to where things don't work quite as expected. And what I don't want is for the industry to back up thinking that behind the meter solutions cannot be part of the equation. Because right now we're seeing a report came out the other day, just in ERCOT alone, that the power queue for new entrants is 4 times peak demand last year.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
that's going to take incredible investment into the grid, but it also is going to take other solutions. So, frankly, the market, and that's just ERCOT. I mean, we're seeing nationwide increased electrification, increased demand, and it's going to require all kinds of solutions. I mean, renewables are really great in their application, and fossil fuels are great in their application. And it's going to take all of us together to solve the challenges that we have that are really national security issues. Power is generally an indicator of the ability of a nation to be successful. And so you see that in the United States. We want to be a leader in that space. We want to be a leader in AI, and it's going to take all kinds. So what I'm hoping for the industry is that as these new entrants come in, they're really focused on how to provide highly reliable power and good quality power versus just make a buck.
Previous speaker Michael Lozano with PBPA talked about the need for electricity, and it was a huge amount that is needed out in West Texas, and I guess one of the answers is that 765 kilovolt system, adding all those lines out there. But from what I'm hearing, even when they bring those lines out, which is going to be years away, obviously, there's still such demand that that won't really affect your business.
Yeah, and I even saw an article yesterday that they're slow playing that the 765 is being delayed. So imagine that. When I started in the power industry, the electrical power industry back in 2003, I remember people talking about, man, this is a 15-year market. We've got such a great opportunity to improve the infrastructure, the aging infrastructure that is throughout the United States. And it was an incredible market from a transmission, distribution, substation standpoint. Then we got to CREZ, which was the competitive renewable energy zones in Texas. And it's like, oh man, now there's a whole market around trying to bring wind energy and get that on the grid. And then we were talking about building multiple 345 kV lines, which did get built across Texas and really even across the country as the infrastructure backbone was strengthened. AEP was the only company at the time that had even built a 765 kV line. In China, they do well over 1,000 kV lines, so they are commonplace in other countries, but it was big for us. I think all of these again, it's going to take everything to really continue keeping our grid up with the growth in this country. I think 765 kV is a good solution, but you've got limited infrastructure that can actually take off the power at those points. You've got to have huge step stations that can step down from 765 to usable voltage levels, and those are going to be fewer offtake points. And so while I look and I see that there are solutions being made that are alleviating some problems, that doesn't solve the problems that are out, the oil field that's being developed out in the middle of nowhere, away from civilization. That doesn't solve where we're putting some of these data centers to where they're not involved in communities. We're seeing now that it used to be time to power that was the number one driver of some of the data center selections. Now it's community involvement. The people are standing up and pushing back in communities against the data centers. So they're moving more remote. And so I think that you will find opportunities around 765 and building a more resilient grid. My only point is, things don't get solved overnight. And right now, some of the solutions that are being laid out on the grid are solving the current demand. If demand continues to grow by the time they're getting there, I've lived in Houston a long time. I know a lot of people probably on your podcast live in Houston and Dallas. Imagine when they do freeways, they'll work for 10 years expanding a freeway, and it feels like within a year that freeway is completely full, and now they're having to do more expansion projects.
Definitely.
The grid works exactly the same way. You build it, they come, and there's more demand, there's more challenges around solving that.
Well, and then the uncertainty of the demand, you talk, I think generally talk, there's a lot of demand, but like I look at AI centers, and not all of those AI centers that you're probably quoting power to are going to actually make. It seems like there's so much out there, and in my mind, a lot of uncertainty as to which of those AI centers, which of those or data centers would actually. How do you manage through that, where you're not sure if that AI center is going to work or that other one's going to, they're going to get the funding for that. That's seems like that's hard to manage your budget and your planning.
Yeah, it is difficult. I mean, like any developing market, you have to be vigilant around trying to make sure the counterparties have real projects. And what we're seeing right now is, the Googles, the Metas, they're out chasing a lot of projects. And what I fear, I don't have any factual information. I don't have a crystal ball to know exactly what's real and what's not real. But what I will say is you can look at the chips that are available and kind of gauge, okay, how many chips can we make and how many data centers can be built, and it gives you a gauge of what's real and not real from just a overall quantity perspective. But I think a lot of what's going on in the power market right now is you've got all of the hyperscalers and even co-locators that are trying to move as quickly as they can. I believe that, and what we're seeing directly is they are vetting multiple projects at the same time. They're telling, maybe 5 to 10 that all of them are um, the highest probability site in their system. And then one ends up winning, the others go away overnight.
Right.
So I can't prove that, but like I said, we've seen it directly on projects that seem very real, and the data center gets to the day before they're supposed to sign the PPA, and they say, you know what, we're pivoting, never mind. And then you see another project be announced. So it kind of feels like there's a lot of smoke in the industry. I mean, there's a lot of things that are very real as well. But overall, the number of projects that are being announced, we expect what actually gets built and across the finish line. It may all happen, but it's going to be happening over a period of time. Again, you got to have chips for the power demand. If they can't get chips, then there's no point in the project.
But you also have to get turbines, all the generators, all the things that you need, and those, my understanding is a long lead time. So how do you match that long lead time for those projects when you don't know if those projects are really going to match or make?
Yeah, we see a little softening in the market for just some availability. As these high probability projects cancel, suddenly you'll see availability open up windows. I think if you go right now, probably 2029, 2030 is as early as you can get equipment. What Highbolt has done, we've got great partnerships. Caterpillar, as I mentioned, is one of our great partners.
Right.
They've been able to source gens to us to where we've got large power blocks coming even in 2027. So we've got several hundred megawatts to start ramping up these facilities. And we always keep our orders slightly ahead to where we've got certainty around being able to deliver equipment. Now, if somebody comes in and says we're going to build a 2 gigawatt site, you're out looking for a lot of equipment. You're trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to get there as quickly as possible. And so between again, there's sometimes you can find equipment that's coming off of another project that didn't come to fruition. Sometimes the answer is we've got to wait out till 2029 or 2030 and let's figure out the fastest power ramp that we can achieve. And permitting comes into play, like any project that you're talking about, especially at this scale. When you start to build so much dedicated and concentrated power on a single site, you've got to go through Title V permitting. It requires often a PSD permit
Yep.
that extends project timelines. And so you're always looking at what is my longest lead time? What is my critical path to power? Fortunately at Highbolt, we have a 100% track record of delivering our projects on time. And so generally whenever we say we can do something, we back it up. And it's again, I see a lot of agreements happening across the industry, a lot of people buying equipment. That's the headlines just about every day. Somebody else has got a new block of equipment. The industry's trying to get ahead of it. Caterpillar has increased their productions. I don't know how many multiples, but they've pivoted hard. They're trying to meet demand, as is every other turbine and reciprocating engine manufacturer. And then these projects really become a factor of what equipment can we get and how quickly can we get it there.
And not to be a negative Nelly here, but look at like railroads, you look at internet, and there's this big growth and then a drop off after that because people overbuild.
Sure.
What's your fear of that within the AI space? And then how could that affect companies like High Volt?
Yeah, I think that's always a fear. It feels like the tailwinds around data centers are very real.
They should
As
sure
it
do right
pertains
now.
to Yeah, as it pertains to high volt, I mean, we're in such diversified markets. As we started out the podcast here, we got our start in oil and gas, and while data centers is a lot of times the most popular thing to talk about, I'm going to go back to that study in Texas. Of the 4x load in Q from current peak demand, I believe the statistic was roughly 13% of that was industrial and manufacturing. So, with a lot of the reshoring that we're seeing in manufacturing across the country, it's making up a large percentage of that load as well. So, I think it's important not to get completely consumed with just the AI discussion. I think there's an underlying power demand. We see it directly across multiple industries. So, from a high volt perspective, we've always focused on long term contracts. We don't go chase temporary loads. We're looking for areas that really need long term infrastructure. So, going back to that midstream analogy, when we come in, they're generally 5 to 20 year contracts, and we're building hardened infrastructure for very high reliability. Once we have those contracts, we've got operating resources that are going to go through the term of that contract, built on industries that are very reliable in their ability to deliver. What you're really talking about is, the industry. Are we getting over our skis for a bigger number and a bigger hype than what's actually going to occur? I think that's to be
Yes, sir.
determined. I can't speak to the AI data centers and know exactly what's real in their world. I will say we've already seen tremendous leaps in technology improvements, and so that today's chips are using a considerable amount of less power than what they did at one point in time, which curls that demand back a little bit. And I think we'll continue to see that, but I remain very bullish on the overall growth. And again, while we're talking about data centers specifically here, I'd say that there is a large demand for power that will keep us going for the foreseeable future.
Has the government kind of pushing back on green power, wind, solar, or it seems like federal government is kind of now more negative on all that. Does that have an impact on y'all or just creates more demand potentially?
Creates more demand, and I'm going to go back and say I think there's actually a need for all solutions.
Sure seems that way.
Where the rub really it was created with renewables is for a very long time. Normally, you create subsidies to support an industry to get it up and running to where there's innovation, and at some point there has to be economics behind that. And I think that's where you see the government starting to change and pull back some of those subsidies. It doesn't mean they're anti renewables. I think it's absolutely part of a solution. I just think it needs to be able to stand alone economically. And so, you know, uh, um, even with renewables on the system, and we see this across utilities. The sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. You've got to have dispatchable power. You've got to have something that's fossil fuel related to support the grid whenever everything else goes wrong. And natural gas is the cheapest, most efficient, cleanest way to produce that power. So, yeah, I think there's always going to be a kind of a struggle and a challenge of making sure that we're making good choices from an economics perspective, but there's always going to be that demand for fossil fuels unless a new technology emerges.
Well, I kind of doubt that'll happen. No, the diversification of the market being in Texas, I think really sets you up nicely.
Yeah, I think that the government in all the things in all the development of power, what we're seeing is the legislation is actually changing in many cases in favor of behind the meter solutions. So there's some real good tailwinds. You see utilities in a lot of the different ISOs and RTOs across the country coming in and saying, hey, large loads above 75 megawatts, they've got to pay for their own infrastructure upgrades. Plus, they've got to have a way to completely jump off the grid in emergency situations. In Texas, you've got SB6 that addresses this. So the
Doesn't.
government, a lot of the legislation right now, while it's still allowing development in renewables, it's also starting to back up some of these fossil fuel and behind the meter solutions that are really going to help again, as part of an overall solution in solving the grid challenges, it's going to help into the future.
Well, and that point that you just made about in front of the meter, af, what is it, after the meter or
Behind
what,
the meter.
behind the
Yeah.
meter, that seems to be a huge issue because, and a lot of pushback you alluded to earlier when you're talking about communities not liking the idea of where that power is coming from because of the effects that it has on their pricing. All of your stuff is behind the meter, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, it's behind the meter completely, addressing a need from a customer that they pay for directly. So it does not impact customer pricing from a utility standpoint.
Okay. Well, a lot of the things you've just addressed throughout the last few minutes talks about different challenges that you might have as a CEO. Uh, we talked about permitting. We talked about equipment supply. I'd really like for you to talk about fuel gas because with the amount of there's a lot of gas out there, and as we know with Waha, you're talking a negative dollar amount, so that should be cheap for a lot of cheap gas. But if you're going to be as busy as it sounds like you're going to busy, are we going to run out of fuel gas? Is that going to be an issue?
Yeah, we're not seeing that right now. I think that there is a lot of natural gas potential in the country,
Well,
and
and maybe
even
not
potential.
now. Sorry, Josh, but maybe
Yeah.
not now. But it seems like if the growth continues to get to the levels at four times, what happens 4, 5, 6 years from now?
Yeah, I still think that we have a lot of reserves, and I'm not a geologist or
Sure.
I'm not in the field to really spectate on how much gas is available. What I do hear in the industry is that there's ample supply, and I think that goes for multi generations. And so, right now, what we're doing is actually helping the situation out in West Texas because we're utilizing the gas that otherwise would be, um, you know, have very little value. The other thing we try to do is always for residue quality gas, which means the NGL values have been pulled out and they're used for more specific valuable purposes. And we continue to find, even across the country and other states that we're working in, natural gas is currently abundant, and we're getting signals that that's going to continue to be the case.
So
So
maybe
I have heard concerns about, from different sources that there's concerns about natural gas. When I talk to producers and folks in the industry that are producing that natural gas, there's less concern.
now I'm saying this with a smile on my face, but maybe I should dislike you and your company then because OTA sells flares. And because that low gas price, by flare business is going great because they're wanting to burn it. It's not worth shipping it down a pipeline. And now here you go providing another means for it that actually adds more value. So again, I'm kind of kidding on that because I want to
Yeah.
keep selling flares, but there's I think plenty of gas to not only burn but also to use in generators. So I think that's great. The other part with the growth of these this equipment you're talking about cannot be cheap. And if you're having to order things way in advance, and I'm sure putting deposits down, the amount of capital that is required has to be huge for this industry to be able to keep growing. Is that's available? It's and I guess being oil and gas is hot, AI is hot, so I assume there's just plenty of money coming in for this.
Yeah, I mean, capital is always a challenge, and I think right now, especially with AI and the quality of counterparties on the other side of some of those projects, we see a lot of capital rushing in to solve this need. I mean, when we talk electricity, um, there's in even natural gas, there's so much technology that has made this a very clean and reliable fuel source for generating electricity. And I think money wants to be attached to those types of projects. When we talk about really long-term projects, long-term contracts, money likes to go out and find those types of opportunities. And so, I think investment's going to continue. That this is certainly an area of growth. And again, take AI completely out of the picture. For the history of the country, there's been pretty steady state load growth across the country, and we see these step changes in demand at times as people start to shift and want to utilize electricity in different ways. We're relying on it at this point. So I think we're going to continue to see capital pour into this space and chase the market.
Well,
It hasn't been a real issue yet, but certainly it's got to be based on viable projects that we see continued demand for.
no, that makes a lot of sense. Well, you say you're not an engineer. Let's hope that you're a psychic. So,
I
talk.
am an engineer,
Oh,
so let
well,
me
I'm sorry,
clarify.
a geologist. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not a geologist.
Yeah,
That's correct.
that's what you were. So yes, but let's hope you're a psychic for. So for our last question, help me understand where this is going and what 5 years from now or some period, where do we end up with this? Just high volt is going to be huge, and there's still a lot of need. And what do you kind of how do you see this all playing out?
Yeah, I think like most industries, you're going to see a few companies really mature and be good operators in the space, and they're going to continue to grow. There may be some consolidation in the space for some of the smaller companies and startups that are trying to figure out the market. um, continued investment in the utility grid to harden the system to build the 765 and bring on new technologies, which will help. But I also see an adaptation and a better understanding of how to integrate behind the meter systems with the utility to solve a bigger problem. And so, part of what we look at High Volt, we're not just solving a temporary customer issue, we're helping really create solutions to solve our national security around power across the United States. And I think that trend's going to continue because, as I said earlier in the podcast, it's going to take a lot of different ideas. It's going to take a lot of concepts for us to maintain our dominance in energy production for the United States to continue to thrive. And we're really proud to be part of the solution.
No, it's amazing to talk to you. I think I've been following your company and the growth, and y'all are definitely a leader in this segment, and I think have a fantastic future. So, Josh, thank you very much for taking time out to visit with me. I think the audience is going to find this amazingly interesting. As you just heard, the amount of power that is needed out in the industry, and not just AI, but in just normal industry and in oil and gas, is a huge amount, and have to look at a variety of means to achieve that. I think High Volt provides a great avenue to really meet the demands of what's going on. So again, I really appreciate High Volt and Josh being on. Thank you for listening to Oilfield Strong. And again, I really appreciate pbog.com. Please check them out. I think if you subscribe there, you'll get a lot of great information, a lot of knowledge in the industry. So thank you very much.